Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is a special Protecting the Planet with Your Kids episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are so delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading and also to inspire families to come together to protect this beautiful world we all call home. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Christa Avampato. She's returning to the show to talk to us about how we can work together to create a more sustainable world. Before we invite Christa into the studio, we want to invite you to a very special event that'll really get your kids thinking about STEM and about creating a beautiful, sustainable world. It's called the Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race. It's happening in beautiful downtown Lowell, Massachusetts on September 18th. It's a great free event. We'll be there at the start and finish line. Our Reading with Your Kids tent will be there. You'll be able to come down, experience some magic, meet some great books that you may want to add to your family library. You could win some great books. You may also be asked to be a part of a future episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Now, what you're going to see at the race is just incredible. The race is all about inviting folks to come down with their homemade, human-powered vehicles that are going to race on mud, in the river, on the street, through the sand. I've never been a part of this event before, but I'm seeing pictures, and it looks amazing. It really is a great time. Come on out, be together, celebrate the end of the summer, celebrate our beautiful world, and join us at the Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race, September 18th in beautiful downtown Lowell, Massachusetts. Join us right now from New York City. We are welcoming back one of the first guests that we've had on the show. She's back to talk to us about how we can work with our kids to protect our beautiful planet. Please welcome back to the show, Christa Avampato. Christa, how are you?
Dad, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm wonderful. And Christa and I became buddies when she was first on the show to celebrate. Tell everybody the book you were celebrating.
Yes, Emerson Page and Where the Light Enters. Yes, a young adult adventure.
Beautiful, beautiful book. And Christa and I, like a lot of authors who've been on the show, we became buddies.
Yes.
And thankfully, through the miracle of technology and social media, we use social media to be friends and not to beat up on people who don't agree with us. But
and that was 4 years ago.
It was.
Isn't that wild?
It was. And I'm really excited to have you back because you, when it comes to our environment and how we can live in big cities like Boston and New York City in a sustainable way, you're actually an expert. You're like a certified expert in that. Am I right?
Yes. So in addition to writing and being an author, I'm also a product developer and actually fairly recently went back to graduate school to study biomimicry, which is basically looking at the natural world and all of the incredible adaptations of mostly of plants and animals, but really of the whole, planet, and applying the design principles that nature uses to products and services that humans develop. And so it's sort of layering science into my product development work, which I've been doing for a long time. And sustainability is, of course, a huge part of that because we don't want to develop products and services that don't work with the living world and make room for all beings on the planet.
Wow, what a novel idea. Why don't we just copy what already exists and what works on the planet and what doesn't hurt the planet and the thing when we're creating things that we need instead of digging up crap from the earth and creating stuff that's poisonous.
Yes, exactly.
Who would have thunk it?
Exactly. And it's also, nature, if you think about, the age of the planet is roughly 4 billion years old. And so it's 4 billion years of research and development, right? So nature has been at this for a very, very long time and has a lot of wisdom and uses far less energy than we use for anything we've ever built. Tends to be more efficient, beautiful design. It has all of the wonderful benefits that, we aspire to have in our design, on top of the fact that it's also good for the planet and not toxic. Yeah. So, yeah, pretty amazing stuff.
So one of the things we're trying to do with our Protecting the Planet with Your Kids series is to give parents the information they need that they can share with their kids to help their kids understand what's going on with climate change in the environment without terrifying them. I have a feeling the kids hear a lot about climate change, and it just scares the life out of them. Can you talk a little bit, what if we're sitting down with our 5-year-olds or our 8-year-olds, our 15-year-olds, and we want to have a conversation about the planet with the kids, where do we begin? What do we need to tell them without terrifying them?
Yeah, and I think that's true for adults too, right? Like if you lead with gloom and doom, and look, there is reason for the gloom and doom. So I am not somebody who sugarcoats, oh, don't worry, it'll all be fine. It's not going to be fine unless we make it fine. But what I try to always lead with, whether it's kids or adults, is leading with empowerment, right? So we have the ability to make personal choices in our everyday, today, you can make choices that help the planet be in a better place tomorrow than it is today. And really coming back to that idea of empowerment. I think with kids, one of the things that we always ask, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? It happens it's a very common topic of conversation with kids of all ages, also adults of all ages too, I'm learning. And to really use this as an opportunity to get them excited about science and get them excited about there's so many different career paths that someone can choose or hobbies that someone can choose that are good for the planet, that are protecting the planet. And it's very easy to get kids engaged, I think, with nature because most of the time, all they have to do is walk outside their front door. Really helping them understand, what a leaf does. It's incredible. What a leaf does on a tree is more incredible than anything that we have ever been able to build on our own, right? They make their own food. We actually can't manufacture, we have to go someplace else, to a plant, to an animal, to get our food. A plant just says oh, here's a little sunlight, here's a little water, here's some chlorophyll. I'm going to make up my own food. That's amazing that they can do, literally they manufacture food out of nothing that we can hold, right? And so I think there's so many different ways to get kids excited about protecting the planet. I also always lead with really marvelous pictures of plants and animals. There are tons of incredible imagery out there, whether it's National Geographic or there's even tons of amateur nature photographers that are amazing. And so leading with gorgeous images of places that maybe they've never been to and saying it's so important for us to protect places like the Amazon, right? To protect the rainforest in Southeast Asia. And this is why beautiful parts of Africa that have animals that we don't have here, in the U.S. on this continent, and getting them excited about protecting those places and how magical those places are for them. I always try to lead with that imagery and then with this message of hope. Yes, it's a scary time. We think that we're protecting them or shielding. Oh, they don't see what's happening. Kids of all ages see what's happening, right? The Western U.S. this summer is burning. It's literally burning. Or, you live in Boston, I live in New York. We're seeing torrential rains, right? How many flash flood warnings have we gotten, right? On our phones. And so they know what's happening in their own environment. They know how hot it is in these heat waves that we're having this summer. And so what we can do is use biomimicry and science to say, yes, this is happening now. This is why it's happening. So give them the why of what's going on. And this is how we can change it so that tomorrow is better than today. And I think leading with that hopeful message is what really helps get them engaged and doesn't scare them to the point that they just want to block their ears and not hear it.
Well, yeah, I agree with you because I'll be honest with you. When I hear people on, and I'm not a kid. I mean, I'm almost as old as the earth. When I hear people on on television or online saying, we only have 12 years. It's 12 years. That's it. That's all we have. My first reaction is, well, if we only have 12 years, let's party. If it's over, then it's over, and we can't do anything about it. Then just enjoy the time we have. I know it's not over. I know that we can make changes, and so I love that we're talking to kids and being positive and being empowering.
Yes.
And I also love that one of the first approaches you're suggesting is to help kids fall in love with the planet, because I think that's where we need to start. We got to save this planet. Why? Because we love it. It's beautiful.
Beautiful, and it has so much to teach us. When I think about nature, it's a library, it's a medicine cabinet, it's a historical archive. Nature provides so much for us. Like most of our modern medicines, like, as you know, I went through a pretty serious health challenge this past year. The medications that my doctors gave me as I was going through my treatments are all derived from plants. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, they're abstracted quite a bit and processed quite a bit, but really the start of so much modern medicine is nature. And so another thing that I really try to impress upon people is that if we really want to protect ourselves and our health, so prevent disease and then treat diseases that we do develop, nature has all of those answers. And if we don't protect these, and most of nature, another thing that I always like to toss out there in terms of the idea of wonder is that we know a teeny tiny fraction of the species on this planet. There are many, 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 many more, like well over 90% of species we haven't even cataloged yet. Mm-hmm. We don't even have a name for them. And so when we, if these habitats get destroyed, we will actually never be able to know them. So imagine like all of that wisdom that's getting lost. Mm-hmm. And so that is really, if people don't want to protect the planet for the sake of the planet itself, which I think we absolutely should. But if that angle doesn't work, I'm like, okay, let me think of another angle. The other angle is from a purely selfish human perspective, we are not a part in terms of separate from nature. We are a part of nature. And if we don't protect nature, we actually don't end up protecting ourselves.
That's a really important point. Until you mention it, it was something that I knew, kind of like in the back of my mind, but it wasn't something that I really embraced. We are a part of nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that happens, you and I live in big cities. Mm-hmm. And so in big cities, it's much easier to disassociate yourself from nature. Right? I actually grew up on an apple farm. So I grew up in a very rural area. And so I spent most of my childhood outside. Like we had a black and white television until I was a teenager. And I'm 45 now. So like that was very strange to not have color television in the house. But really, I spent most of my time outside. Mm-hmm. And so that in many ways, I was very, very fortunate because like you were saying, I fell in love with nature. I mean, from the time I was born. Right. And so I always had this reverence and respect and love for the natural world. And it doesn't happen with a lot of kids now who grow up even in suburban areas. They're inside a lot more. We're on screens a lot more. And so that's something that I've been thinking about too. I love organizations like the Fresh Air Fund, which gets kids out of the city and into natural environments. Because I think if you can get kids into a natural place, they start to have a reverence for nature that is very difficult. It's not impossible, but difficult to get if you are not immersed in it and giving them that experience of like, the air smells so good like, outside of the city when it's not polluted. Like the water tastes amazing. Like, oh my God, like I feel my lungs opening up, when I'm outside of a city or outside of a polluted area. And so I always think about that too, of how do we get more kids that kind of experience? Mm-hmm. Because I think that actually will help a lot. And it sticks with you. You have those, those experiences as a kid that they stay with you your whole life.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing that I always try to, if I can't get kids out of the city, I at least try to bring the outside world like into them,
Yeah.
you know, if they're in a classroom or something like that.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I did with my kids when they were young, we had this big, beautiful oak tree in our backyard that unfortunately we had to take down because it was diseased. But we would spend hours sitting underneath that tree, either reading stories together or just looking in the trees and imagining all of the different creatures that were calling that tree home.
Yes.
And it was really fun for us as a family to do.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing too, is that no matter where we are, so I live pretty close to Central Park, which is a huge green space here in New York. So I live about half a block from there. So I take my little dog there a couple times a day. And it is incredible to go into any kind of small patch of earth. And the number of creatures that are making that patch of earth their home is amazing. And so that's another thing that I try to do with kids, of helping them recognize like what's happening. Nature is all around them, whether or not they can see it. Like what's underground is amazing. Like what's underwater is amazing. What's up in the trees is incredible. Sometimes I feel like we get so focused on, you know, where our sight lines are, which makes sense, right? Like this is our experience that we're living in every day. But if you can get kids to look up, or get them to look down, or get them to dig around in a tiny, you know, community garden or something like that, what you start to realize is, oh, there are whole other worlds, like multitudes of worlds that are happening all around us that we are not aware of. And I think opening up their mind to that, of like, oh, so what I do is not just about me. It's not just about my neighbors. It's about my global neighbors, right? Like all of the beings that I share this planet with, you know, plants and trees and bacteria and animals, you know, included.
So once we help our kids fall in love with the earth and help them understand that we are part of this thing we call nature, what are some of the choices that we can talk about with our kids that we can make every day that will make a difference tomorrow?
Yep, exactly. So one of the things that I really love is I love for kids to just have a plant that they take care of. I don't care where they get that plant from. I don't care if they grow it from a seed. I don't care if they get it from like a little urban nursery. I don't care if it's like a little plant in their park that they go over and like water, take care of. You know, there's so many amazing things you can do with container gardens. So in New York City, like I don't have any outdoor space that's mine, right? I don't have a backyard that's just mine per se, but I do have a little fire escape. I do have some windowsills back here in my kitchen. And I have tiny little container plants. And you can use milk cartons. You can use an old mug that you don't use anymore, like all kinds of like recycled and upcycled containers. You put a little dirt in, give it a little water, give it a little sunlight. And I think that wonder of like growing something is really exciting, I think, and empowering for kids. And also recognizing that like, wow, the earth provides like everything. When they go into a grocery store, like somebody grew that watermelon out of the ground. Like it isn't just like in some bin or on a shelf, right? Or in a container. So that's, I think container gardens or growing anything or taking care of, some type of nature, whether it's in a city park or on their windowsill, I think is great. Also just eating a diet that's rich in plants and lower in animal products. So I eat a plant-based diet. I eat a tiny bit of meat. I eat a little bit of dairy, but most of what I eat is fruits and vegetables. What that does a number of things. So one, fruits and vegetables are much lighter on the earth than animal products in terms of the amount of resources, water, land, processing that they need in order to get to our grocery stores and get into our homes. It's also better for you, right? There's all kinds of scientific research that if you eat a diet that is mostly plants, mostly fruits and vegetables, you will be a healthier person. You have a better shot at a healthier life than if you eat lots of animal products. And so that's a choice we make every single time we sit down to eat anything. We make that choice. Also, reducing food waste is another big thing of like, we in the US, we throw away about 40% of the food that we have, which is like tragic. One, when you think about hunger, right? So 1 in 6 Americans is hungry every night. They go to bed and they don't know where their next meal is coming from. Like 1 out of 6. That's a lot of people. And I actually grew up a pretty poor kid. We grew up below the poverty line. We grew a lot of the food that we ate because we didn't really have a choice. And we lived in a farming community. So we had lots of friends who were farmers who would drop stuff off at our doorstep that we would see. But reducing food waste. So if you eat everything that you grow or everything that you buy, just doing that of like trying to not throw out food, that's a huge win for the planet. Because you think about food waste and it's all the resources it took to produce that food just in the trash, right? Wasted all those resources. And it often ends up in the landfill, which like our landfills are already overrun. So, and if we do have food scraps, if we can find a way to compost them. So even though I don't have a garden, there are places in New York that I can go to drop off my compost, like my vegetable scraps and stuff like that. They will take it. They take it to a city processing plant. They produce it. They produce compost from it. And then that compost goes to our city parks and helps to like fertilize our parks, which is amazing. And then another thing that you can do is, you know, we are a very car centric country. I wish we weren't, but we are. Mm-hmm. We're getting better. If you can walk, bike, or take public transit, that's also a huge win. And that's a choice that you're making every time you try to go somewhere. If you can drive your car less, that's also a big win for the planet. Fewer carbon emissions into the atmosphere, and also more exercise for our bodies, mm-hmm. which we know is a good thing to do. So those are a couple of things that, you know, kids and families can make those choices every single day, and be empowered by them.
And as you were talking about those choices, not wasting food, not throwing away almost half of our food, not needing to buy gas for our car. That means we have more money to do fun things.
Exactly. It's good for our health. It's good for our bank accounts. It's good for, and we have the, you know, we can go spend money exactly like you said on experiences, on, you know, taking care of other people. Like I try to donate a certain amount of money that I make to nonprofits that are doing great things in the community and in the world. So I think I totally agree that there's an economic benefit of like, if you think about just the waste, mm-hmm. right? Of like, it's literally like when you throw out food, you are literally burning money in a barrel. Like it's, and 40% of the amount of food that we have in this country going to waste is just, I mean, it's hard for me to even imagine how that's true. And I wouldn't believe it if there weren't so many like, mm-hmm. sources that reconfirm it, because it's a staggering amount.
Right.
Staggering.
One of the things, you recently wrote a fantastic article that kind of really opened up my eyes to something that I never even thought of, this idea of urban farming. So there's a lot of space in cities like New York and Boston that's not being used. And you were telling me that there are people who decided, hey, this isn't a store anymore. This isn't a warehouse anymore. Why don't we turn it into an indoor farm? Yeah,
with hydroponics. So hydroponics is a way of growing plants without soil. So basically you grow the plants with nutrient-rich water and light. And so we have a few different organizations around the country. One specifically here in New York is called Farm.one, O-N-E, just like the number. And they had a small urban farm downtown that they set up sort of as a test, sort of as a pilot. And then they opened up a bigger urban farm with hydroponics in another space. And now, later this month, maybe next month, they're opening up a huge neighborhood, what's known as a neighborhood garden, in a neighborhood farm, actually, in Brooklyn. And so it's very, very exciting. They took like this old empty space that's in Prospect Heights, which is a really popular neighborhood here in Brooklyn. And they decided that they were going to create an urban farm. And so they did it with hydroponics. The other, so many great things about urban farming. You can grow trays of food on top of one another. So the thing with farms is that they have to be spread out horizontally, right? So they take up a lot of space. Urban farming, you can actually grow vertically. So you can have tray after tray after tray of food that's growing. They also have some really cool technology where if you've ever been in some libraries, when I was in college, we had these libraries that were like, they were collapsible stacks. So you could turn this crank and the bookcases would go up against one another to see, you could put more books in that space, right? And every time you wanted to go into an aisle, you would turn the crank and go down that aisle. They do the same thing with hydroponics so that they can get even more plants into this small space. Wow. It's very, very cool. And it's really kind of combining science and technology and this desire for delicious, fresh food in one place. It's also great because you have almost no transportation costs because the food they're growing is being consumed by New Yorkers and being sold to New York restaurants and individuals through a subscription service. So I do think that urban farming, when we think about the future, right now, most of our produce in the United States comes from the West and most of it from California. And so we think about in New York, you've got to travel 3,000 miles to get that vegetable to the grocery store. And I'm not paying that much for it relatively at the grocery store. So when you think about all of that environmental cost, for a lot of produce, there's no reason why we can't grow them. And you can also, in a vertical farm, an indoor farm, you can grow things 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, right? You're not subject to the whims of nature, and weather. You can actually set up these ideal growing experiences, and have fresh fruits and vegetables of all different kinds all year round, as opposed to being confined to a season, which is also better for our health to have access to fresh fruits and veggies all the time.
Yeah. And if we don't need to ship tons and tons of food from the West or to the East or from South America to North America, we don't have all that carbon going into the air. And
exactly.
What a win-win. And what a cool, it's like a whole new world of opportunities for creative kids right now who are 10, 11 years old, 5, 6 years old. They can come up with some really cool idea to turn a space into a place that's going to feed a whole neighborhood or a whole city.
Yes. And also, if you think about these opportunities for, I think about rewilding spaces. So that's another thing with vertical farming is that if you use this old building as a farm, you can actually possibly return some of this land that we have tilled up for farms. You can return that land to the wild. Like you can give it back to nature because you don't need it for agriculture anymore. So that idea is also really exciting when you think about, can we start seedlings of trees indoors and then reforest places where we've unfortunately taken out forests for agriculture? Are there things that we can do like that? And also bring kids and families and adults and anybody who's interested in, do they want to come spend an afternoon on the farm, planting seeds, harvesting vegetables? Again, it's another way to give someone in a city environment access to nature, even if it's nature that we had to, create through technology and innovation, but just giving them the opportunity to pick their own fruits and vegetables or plant their own fruits and vegetables, I think is really exciting.
Yeah. As somebody who grew up in the city, I think, until I started traveling around, and I had no idea of how big a farm had to be.
Oh, yeah.
And a couple of years ago, I was in Costa Rica, and we went down and we saw a banana plantation. And it was beautiful, but there were bananas for miles in every direction. And so it was cool and it was beautiful, but it's like, that's a lot of space dedicated to bananas.
And to be fair, nature didn't build that banana plantation, right? There were native habitats that needed to be cleared, right, to grow all of those banana trees. So to think about we had to take out native habitats and all of the beings who live there. And then you think about all of the pesticides, all of the chemicals and fertilizers that get put on crops. Like when we think about urban farming, the other thing about hydroponics is you don't have to use any pesticides. You don't have to use any chemicals because there's no pests to get into this in this indoor farm. So it's also a healthier, product that you're, producing. Not that you have to use pesticides and chemicals to grow on a farm that's in the earth. Like there are other means, but there are, most commercial farms use some kind of chemical fertilizer, some type of pesticide, which we know is not great for us. And we know it's not great for the planet.
Wow. This has been a blast. I think we only scratched the surface. Like you were saying earlier, we haven't met 90% of the species that exist here on the planet. I know we've spoken to oceanographers, and we've only explored 5% of the ocean.
It's not wild.
Yes. And so this idea of sustainability and changing the way we live so that we live more in harmony with nature, I think we're only scratching the surface. And I think that this is something that is needed, but I think it's also something that's really exciting for a family to do. It's just to talk to our kids about these possibilities, that they're going to be part of and that maybe they create out of their imagination.
Yes, absolutely. And it's all around them. Everything that we can dream up. You think about, like, I write mostly fantasy and science fiction, from a fiction perspective. And nature is a constant source of inspiration for me because there's so much wonder out there. And that's true. It's true for kids too.
Yeah. Hey, before we go, can you tell everybody where they can go to find out more about you and your writing?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to my website, which is just my first name, my last name.com, ChristaAvampato.com. I'm also on Twitter at ChristaNYC.com. And then I'm also on Instagram at ChristaRoseNYC.
Awesome. And your book, Emerson Page, that would be a great book to read with your older kids underneath a big old beautiful maple tree.
It absolutely would. And she, I just wrote the second installment of her story, and trees actually figure very prominently. Science figures very prominently into her story to begin with. But in the second book, she really gets into nature and really, really gets into science as she is a budding scientist. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We've had a great time speaking to a real friend of the show about how we can protect the planet with our kids, Christa Avampato. Hey, Christa, thanks so much for being with us again.
Thanks, Dad. It was so great to talk to you. Have a great day.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest would be Morenica Oyanusi. She'll be here to celebrate chasing butterflies in the sunlight. That's the next episode of the podcast. If you're the author of a great children's book, we would love to help you tell the world all about it. All you need to do is to go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the author's Click Here button at the top of the page. Find out how you can be a guest on the show and find out how you can apply for our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, my buddy, Christa Avampato. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Helen Frazier, Justina Thompson. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back here in the studio. Most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.